So we're speaking with John Bonifaz, who's the legal director of Voter Action, which is a national voting rights organization, and also director of Free Speech for People at freespeechforpeople.org. So you're based where we are. You're in Amherst, we're in Northampton.
Yes.
Interesting part of the country in that it's very progressive, but at the same time, it's in the middle of a state that went in a very interesting direction with the special election just a couple of months ago.
Right.
Of course, we're talking about the Scott Brown victory. I read some of what you've written about that and some of what you've said. Now that we're a little bit further away from when it actually happened and the shock of it all, what's kind of your take on what went on?
Well, I think what we need to recognize is that there's a populist anger out there that, in my view, needs to be directed really where the problem is, which is that we have lost control of our elections and our government with the corporate takeover of our Constitution and our democracy.
And specifically with that election, you think the corporate angle affected the outcome?
Well, I think what happened is people didn't know where to place their anger. And there wasn't any voice in that election that was making clear that really the problem is corporate America and the way it's drowning out our voices and the way it's really taking over much of our society without any checks or balances. So I think the problem in that race really was that there wasn't that different kind of voice.
And part of the problem, at least I followed it pretty closely, also seemed to me that Martha Coakley may not have been the best candidate for that moment, right? I mean, that has to be some component too.
Well, she didn't fully embrace that message of identifying that we do need to wake up and see what's happening. I mean, now, some months later, we see, the oil gusher in the Gulf, and we see what's happened with 29 coal miners dying in West Virginia. We see these various corporate abuses in different parts of the country, and more, I think people recognize that is the challenge for us as a society. Is it going to be we the people, or is it going to be we the corporations that govern?
And do you think specifically as it applied to that election, but just moving more broadly, even past that, Citizens United and the way that elections are financed and the way that campaign ads are produced and consumed. I mean, is the whole landscape, which of those things, I guess, that I mentioned, or some others that I didn't, do you think is the main thing we could actually change in short order?
Well, I think that the Citizens United ruling, the Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United v. FEC, is really the most direct threat right now to our elections and our democracy. And we as a people need to organize and mobilize and fight back on it. This is a ruling which unleashes billions and billions of corporate dollars into our elections. And as much as corporate America had control over our election cycles prior to this ruling, this is a landscape change in how we have our campaigns run and how we have our government run. And we need to respond in a forceful way, and that way is through a constitutional amendment process, which is why we've launched the Free Speech for People campaign.
So we'll get a little more to the specifics of the possibility of amending, which I know I work with Tom Hartman a lot, and
Yes.
he has been talking about amending, and he was actually in our part of the country talking about
Right.
this just last week. Do you also worry a little bit that, for example, if my audience just tuned in before the last question that I asked you, that they would get a sense that you are actually against businesses in some way, which is maybe a connotation that progressives have had to deal with for a while, but even more so recently, that when they talk about, well, Citizens United is bad, they're wrapped up with this, we also don't like businesses.
Right. No, I think that's a fair question. And the fact is we've been careful with the building of the Free Speech for People campaign to make clear that we're in favor of responsible businesses. And that's why the American Independent Business Alliance is part of our coalition, independent businesses around the country that are standing up and saying no to this ruling. Most businesses want to do their job of doing their business. They don't want to be brought into the political sphere. But there are these mega corporations like BP, like Chevron Texaco, that really do have this kind of influence of our process, that buy off government regulators, buy off our government, and that's the kind of threat that is posed by this ruling. The top Fortune 100 companies alone made $600 billion in profits in 2008. If they had chosen less than 2% of their profits to be able to spend in the 2008 election, as they now are able to do from their general treasury funds, they would have more than doubled all the amount of money spent by the Obama, McCain, federal campaigns, congressional campaigns, all combined. And
it can almost be hard to think about it for the average person when you say just the amount of money. But when you say it would more than double the total that was spent, I mean, that seems to me like a really tangible way of showing the magnitude of the ruling, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the threat here. It's not the threat of the small business, of course. It's the threat of these mega corporations that have billions and billions of dollars in their general treasury funds. And, the bottom line here is that corporations are not people. They're not like you and me. They do not have human qualities. In fact, they have state-based advantages that you and I do not have: limited liability, perpetual life, the ability to aggregate wealth and distribute wealth. And when we're dealing with these mega corporations, they have such a huge general treasury resource that they will really come in and drown out ordinary citizen speech and our elections.
A couple of weeks ago, I don't know if you know ACLU attorney Bill Newman, who's
Yes.
from our part of the country. I had him on, and somehow we got to talking about the Arizona immigration bill and Citizens United. And
Yes.
somehow we came up with this Sophie's choice. If you had to pick the one that you could change, if you absolutely had to, which would it be? And his kind of argument was, Arizona immigration, we can we essentially just have to reverse that. But Citizens United, we can amend and we can pass additional things where we can leave the law as it stands, but we can still change the effect of it without just reversing it altogether. Do you agree? Do you disagree?
Well, first, I think the Arizona law ought to be overturned as well. I agree fully with that. But I also think that we have to deal with the core problem that the Citizens United ruling creates, which is that corporations have free speech rights under the First Amendment that is antithetical to what the framers intended and what the first 2 centuries of our nations intended. Corporations never were treated with free speech rights for the first 2 centuries of our nation's history. And then Lewis Powell, an attorney at that time with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, wrote a memorandum for them in 1971 that articulated how corporate America could use the First Amendment, misuse in our view, to strike down democratic reforms. He became Justice Lewis Powell. He became an architect of this corporate rights doctrine. And that's the threat that is the extreme extension now in the Citizens United ruling that's posed to our democracy.
Midweek Politics is brought to you in part by Jackson & Connor, classically modern men's apparel in Northampton, Massachusetts on the 2nd floor of Thorne's Marketplace. By DIF Design, specializing in custom business websites at difdesign.com. And by ShenTrition.com, provider of all-natural superfood and adaptogenic herbal blend at ShenTrition.com. To find out more about underwriting Midweek Politics, visit midweekpolitics.com.